Good afternoon, everybody. It is Monday, November the 1st. And we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at some bulk editing. So what I was thinking of in regard to all of that notion was to do a little bit more work inside of our sandbox with our capstone students and look at creating a page called Assign Teams, where we're going to do some bulk editing of all the capstone students' placements on any given team. Now, in terms of this lesson for today, I want to look at a couple of aspects of it. There's the technical aspect in terms of how we implement this. That has to do with model binding a collection in Razor Pages. And then we've also got the technical aspects of some of our business logic layer processing of business rules and ensuring that as we do the processing of the bulk update, that we do it in a transactional fashion so that we're ensuring that a single transaction takes place. And if you remember some of the stuff from database fundamentals where you looked at transactions, you were handling transactions at the level of the database through something called stored procedures. But we'll be looking at transactions at the level of the application and ensuring that that we have a single success or fail on all of the changes to various tables in the database. So we'll look at technically how do we accomplish those sorts of things, but I also want to discuss some of the characteristics of some of the design decisions, bulk updates versus single item updates, when to do bulk updates, and some of the challenges we face when we're looking at doing bulk updates at times. So to get a little bit of a look at what it is we want to be able to create or work with, I've done some editing on my README for the mockups, and I've adjusted a couple of things. But basically, we want to create a form that's somewhat like this for the capstone teams, where we list, perhaps in a tabular kind of a layout, the names of all the students with drop downs for which client they're going to be assigned to, and a little input where we can enter in the letter of the team that they're going to be part of, because sometimes for a capstone project for a given client, we may want to be having two teams of students work on the project for that client so that the client can kind of choose between those two particular items. In regard to filling the information for a drop-down list, we're going to take a little bit of a look at storing that kind of information in a class that we'll call client info. So that consideration for a drop-down is the kind of a thing where we want to have, typically for a drop-down, we want to have two pieces of information because every option in the drop-down is going to have a value component. So that'll be some unique identifier for the option, and some kind of text that we would want to be displaying for every item in that option. So that works pretty nicely when we create a client info that basically just has the ID of the client and the name of the company. So we're going to use that to basically populate all of these drop downs. As far as getting the information of the student, what client they're currently assigned to, what team letter they're in, that is going to be done through the student assignment record or class that we're going to work with. And we're actually going to use this class for both populating this this table as well as for doing an update. So it's good for us to note that we basically have a single button here to save teams. So this is basically giving us that whole notion that we are going to be doing bulk updating. And that's different, of course, from the single item updating that you would have seen in your CRUD kind of behavior. Now, when it comes to bulk updating, that can be a pretty handy sort of a thing when you're doing the kinds of updates, particularly if they're manual bulk updates. If you're doing the kinds of updates where they do them relatively infrequently, they just want to set up a whole bunch of data or set up a whole bunch of information to get things rolling. You can imagine things such as enrolling students in a particular classroom or assigning instructors to teach certain classes, or in this case, assigning students to work on certain work with certain clients in Capstone. It's done once, let's say at the beginning of the term. And it doesn't need a whole lot of maintenance, and it isn't something that develops over time, that sort of a thing. So, and basically you've got the same repeated kind of changes happening to your data for a wide range of data items. So in this case, a whole bunch of students that we're assigning to a given Capstone client. And if you're doing bulk updating where you are basically just doing the initial setup, where there is no information, then basically you have the kind of a situation where because there is no existing info being that was stored regarding this, it becomes pretty much all insert statements that wind up happening, a whole bunch of inserts into the database. However, if you have a situation where you have, and let me get a single line. If you have a situation where you do have existing assignments, so here I'll just say existing information, existing assignments to teams, then you have to ask yourself the question, does this bulk entry wind up replacing the current assignments? And if it does, you have the situation of possibly having inserts, updates, and or deletes that are occurring at the same time in the same process of this save teams. But regardless, what you've got is this bulk updating is something that should be happening in your business logic layer. Because that's part of the whole processing that you're trying to capture in terms of the business flow. Questions or comments so far? Okay. Want to make a couple other comments about the whole student assignment and its relationship to all of this. So with the student assignment, we've got the notion of doing a query. So we'd be reading current information in the database about the student assignments, and we would use that for display purposes. So that includes basically knowing the full name, knowing the team letter, and for the client ID, basically knowing that for associating it with the drop down information, which is why it's actually something that could be regarded as a nullable item. So it's an int question mark because the student may not be assigned to any information. And so from a query perspective, those are the only three things we would be needing to pull from the database to render this page. So in rendering all of that information. However, there's also the notion of the command portion of it. So by command, what I mean is that when we do the save teams, we are essentially issuing our command to modify the information in the database. And so we'll want to be pulling all of these student assignments. And in the process of making our inserts, updates, deletes, those kinds of changes into our database, the only things that we need are the student ID, identify which student is being assigned, the client ID, and the team letter. And all of that stuff is basically identifiable by the ERD. If you look at that at that table that joins those two other tables of students and clients, you'll find that we need to insert the student ID, the client ID, and the team letter, but we never make a change to the student's name. This never updates the student's name. And so this student ID portion right here is essentially something that is being kept in some kind of hidden input to track what student it is, whereas the other items, such as the client ID, is stored from or obtained from the select element. We'll use an ASP4. And the team letter is done with an input, again with an ASP4. Actually, we may not use an ASP4. I think actually we'll be using a name equal. But either way, we're going to be using something with the select and then something with our input type equal text. And that distinction between query and command is something that we're going to see in an even larger way when we get to some of the other kinds of forms that we have to make for our application, for our end users. So again, thinking back to that west wind example and turning around and doing the placement of customer orders, that is one where the difference between the shape of the information that we have to read from the database becomes very different from the shape of the information that we use to update the database. In command query responsibility segregation, we turn around and use dedicated classes or types for just the query portion and for just the command portion. So CQRS, that's the command query responsibility segregation. We use separate data types for queries and commands. But this one has such a close overlap that and it's a simplistic kind of a scenario, being a bulk update, that that turning around and using the same data type is acceptable. So that full separation is kind of unnecessary at this point. If we wind up having something that does start to differ a whole lot more, then yes, we would separate out and create a different record data type for looking up a student assignment and one from changing a student assignment. Okay, let me just grab screenshots here. And here's that ERD that shows the team assignments. Student ID, client ID are both working as a composite key, and we've got the team number as an nvarchar1. Actually, I wonder why I made that an nvarchar1. That should really be an nchar1. Fixed length. It's going to be a single character. Now, there's something else that's going on with this, and that is the whole notion of the business rules. So before, when we were doing CRUD updates, we were pretty much just accepting the data that was coming in. We were just leaving the database table constraints as being whether they be foreign key constraints or column constraints for minimum values or what have you. We were letting the database handle all of that validation, control that validation. Our entity classes had some of those validation attributes on there, so we were doing some pre-validating or pre-flight approval, as it were, of what would be enforced at the level of the database. But now we've got business rules that focus on something that's a little bit different. So here we're saying that that the smallest team size that we're going to allow is going to be 4 students. So that's basically our minimum size. And then we also have a maximum size of 7 students. So as we divvy up and go through assigning students to different teams, we're going to want to make sure that we enforce that rule in our business logic layer. And so how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to be needing to group them by their different teams and count how many are in each group, know how many there are. So clients that have more than 7 students must be broken into separate teams, each with a team letter. So starting with A. So this one here may require a little bit of asking about what that means. And so let me throw this out to you. Imagine for the moment that we've got a bookstore client. So one of the clients is a bookstore, and we've got another client that is a tire repair store, let's say. And imagine then that for the bookstore, we wound up having 9 students set up for the bookstore. For the tire repair store, we had 7 students. So what would be the team letters for the bookstore? That we would possibly have? A and B, that's correct. So in interpreting this, clients with more than 7 students, each with a team letter starting with A, we would be expecting team A and team B. However, it might be divided up, maybe 4 and 5, maybe actually, yeah, 4 and 5 is pretty much the only kind of grouping that we could wind up having out of that. Now for the tire repair store, what would the team letters be for the tire repair store? So some of you said A, some of you said C. Okay, so that partly depends upon how you're thinking of this particular requirement. There's a little bit of vagueness in the description because you might be thinking, well, okay, we're going to be starting team letters with A, but is that starting then across all of the teams, in which case it would be C? That is starting across all of the clients? Or is it only within the clients? So that each with a each with a team letter starting with A, you're left with a question out of that you should basically ask. Is that within each client or across all clients? Let's assume that talking with whoever's building this, that we do it within, because there's a little bit of an implication. There's a little bit of an implication from this that we're talking about any given client being broken, having their students assigned to there being broken into separate teams. So we'll go then with within each client for this understanding. Okay, only assign students to clients that have been confirmed as participating. So there is on the clients table that whole aspect that they would have to be a confirmed client. So that part of that will depend upon this column right here, confirmed. So these are business rules that we're going to apply. And so when we think of what's happening inside of our business logic layer, our method is going to have a couple areas of processing. We're going to have validation of our business rules. And then we're going to have the actual database processing, where we go and store stuff into the database. Now, when it comes to divvying up or assigning which students get into which team, from this user interface, it appears that the user is going to be actually making those decisions about A and B and all of that sort of stuff. So that's going to be stuff that we validate. Did the user follow this rule, as opposed to us just throwing people into the different teams? So that's what we're going to want to set up. Any questions about our goal of what we want to achieve? Well, let's go ahead and open this up inside of Visual Studio. And maybe part of what I'll do as well is I'll start making some issues related to all of this. So this is the capstone student assignments. Okay. GH browse. Let's go to my issues. Let's make a milestone. Capstone student assignments. I want to have this done by Wednesday. I'll skip a description on that. I'll just create the simple milestone. But what I will do then is, as far as the individual issues, I can make individual issues from inside of here. So, um, um, so I'm going to create an issue that is for query uh, query client info, and I'll maybe go and yeah, I'll leave it like that, and then um, query the database for the client info for the drop down controls. And I'm going to add a little bit of metadata. I'm going to add a milestone of the capstone student assignments, and I'll submit that. By the way, I'm going to just ask thumbs up if you have the GitHub CLI installed. So yeah, I'm doing all of this with the GitHub CLI. If I was actually doing my software development inside of Visual Studio Code, I could, that'd be pretty nice. I'd be able to stay in a single environment. So I'm going to have that issue. Let's see what else. I'm going to want to have okay, I'm going to want to have the GH issue create form for capstone team assignments. Generate the form to get the capstone or to bulk edit the capstone team assignments. And that's really going to have a couple parts of it. I need to create the model for the data. I'm going to want to lay out the form, and I want to gather the form's data for BLL processing. So save it like that. I'll add some metadata, milestone, capstone student assignments, and then I'm going to do a GH issue create assign capstone teams with business rules, and so I'm going to say follow these business rules And okay, yeah, I want to go to, where is that mockups one? And although it's not actually stated as a business rule, I'll also throw in here, remember to process everything as a single transaction. Add some metadata, milestone, capstone student assignments. Okay. Issue list. GH issue -- help. GH issue view. GH issue view -- help. Do URL flags, JSON fields, filter output using a JSON query expression. I'll have to figure out how to do those things a little bit easier. Oh, well, having said that, I know I've got that query the client information, number 17. And I'm going to have a class. So let's dive into our code. I'm going to go to the back end in the models. And this one's just for querying. So I'm going to go ahead and add my class, which I think was called client info. And instead of it being a class, it's going to be a record of information. Okay. Control Z. GH issue view 17. So that want to include querying the database for that client info. So let's go ahead and do the query. And let me just close all but this. And I'm going to want to do this under the capstone service. So let me just pull that right there for the moment. Queries, reading the database, that was listing the student assignments. What was that data type again? Last name, first name, team. Okay. Let me create a new one. This is going to be a public list of client info. List confirmed clients. And I'm going to say var result is equal to from the company in the underscore context capstone clients, where the company is confirmed. And I'm going to want to select new client info using an initializer list. And specifically, the client ID is going to be the company ID, and the company is going to be the company, not contact name, company name. There it is. We'll return the result as a list. Give me a thumbs up when you've coded this. Okay, so I'm going to do a commit of this. Git add src slash sandbox dot. And actually, I'm going to first of all do Control Shift B, make sure everything builds correctly. Git status. So capstone service, blah, blah, blah. You know what? I don't think it's actually saved the back. Oh, wait a minute. Does it even have to save backend anymore? No, because this is we're doing .NET Core. We don't have to worry about those individual file things. Good. So git git commit -m closes 17. Yep. Git push. And if I do a gh issue list, issue number 17 was, oh, did I say, I said closes 17, but not closes number 17. Okay, let's see. Git amend -m closes number 17. Git amend. Okay. See, git help. Git -- help. Git commit amend. I think it is. Git commit -- help. See if I can get information on that. Nope. Oh, git help -a, git help -g, list available subcommands, some concept guides. Okay. So it's git help commit. Git help -a commit. Aha, there we go. See, git help command to read about a specific command. There's more stuff. Wow, there's a lot to learn about Git. If you don't know everything about Git, you're not the only one. Okay. Oh, look. One of those actually opened up this. Control, find, amend. An M, that's what it is. Dash, dash, amend. Replace the tip of the current branch by creating a new commit. Prepared as usual, effect of the items of aspect. Da, da, da. Okay, I think I know what I need to do now. Clear screen. Git commit dash amend. And is it a single dash or is it double dash? Double dash amend. Double dash amend. Dash M closes pound 17. Oh, did that not work? It's 1M. Did I do that again? 1M amend. There, that's better. Closes number 17. Thank you. Git push. Failed to push some refs. Git pull. Git push. Okay. GH issue list. Aha. Issue number 17 is closed. A little bit longer, but I learned a little something in the process. Okay. GH issue view 18. Create the model for the data, lay out the form, yada, yada. So I got the student assignment. Now this one looks like it's different than the student assignment I currently have. That had last name, first name, team assignment. I think I'm going to maybe rename my particular new record type as being not student assignment, but student student team assignment. It's a terrible name. Oh, and the constructor needs to be fixed up as well. That should be null, 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 null. Good. There we go. Fix up my little README documentation. Oop. Paste. I do want this to be in its own file. Control dot, move type to file. That's better. Okay. Then I'm going to want to do some stuff that's going to be querying that. Public list of student team assignment. STA, student team assignment. Student team assignment, okay. And what am I going to call this? Any guidance that I gave myself as I was thinking? list team assignments. Our result is equal to from the person in underscore context students, where actually I won't need a where. I'm just going to do a select new student team assignment. And specifically, the student ID will be equal to the person dot student ID. The full name is going to be equal to the person first name space person last name. The next part for the client ID, that's going to be equal to if the person, so person has team assignments, a whole bunch of team assignments. So if the team assignments has if there are any team assignments, then I will take the person team assignments first, client ID, or sorry, client ID. Otherwise, I'll have a null value. And the team letter is going to be the person team assignments with any. Then I will have the person team assignment first letter or number, team number, they called it, otherwise null. And I will return the result as a list. I'm going to just try this out in LinkPad. See what this looks like. And I'll go with capstone. And, oh, except I don't have context. Need to specify that. I don't have a class name. And no implicit conversion between an int and a null. So I'll make an int question mark conversion. And let's see. Okay, looks like I've only got one assigned, so that's pretty good. Okay, I think that'll work. I might need to remember that int null casting. I'll see if I need, well, it doesn't hurt to put it in. Int question mark null. Although here it seems to imply that the cast is redundant. So maybe I won't have that in. Maybe I'll remove that. Maybe that was only needed in the other one. Could I show my student team assignment real quick? Yeah, sure. Let me pop that up here. So let's kind of just save things at this point. We'll come back from a break and we'll continue on looking at our implementation. So Catherine's got a bit of a question. When you use the Git CLI to make an issue, for you it's opening in Notepad instead of VS Code. Even though my default for Markdown files is VS Code. So how do you fix that? So with the GitHub CLI, you use the config set. So what you would use is you would type in gh config set editor and then in quotes code space dash dash wait end quote. And by the way, having that dash dash wait along with code is really important. So just to sort of highlight a little bit of that, grab a screenshot first. There we go. So what that means is when you're setting the editor, you're effectively saying when it goes to launch the editor, it should be launching whatever program runs the editor. The default is Notepad, but you can set it to Visual Studio Code. So that's what code is on the command line. If you wanted to launch Visual Studio Code, you would just type code. And the dash dash wait means that as you're using Visual Studio Code to do the editing, it's going to wait until you close that file. So this dash dash wait is important. Okay. So we finished making the capstone service for our list team assignments. And I want to do a quick little commit. Control Z. Clear screen. Git add src sandbox dot git status. Okay. Git commit -m number 18. View model with BLL method. GH issue edit 18. I want to edit the body and E to launch this. So I created the model for the data. Control F4, submit, yep. Git push. And we'll go and start looking at the page now. Did I give myself any guidance as to what to call the page? Page called Assign Teams. There it is. I knew I had put something in there. Let's go to our pages, and this is kind of a maintenance type of a thing. I'll put it under the admin folder, and I will add a Razor page called Assign Teams. Assign Teams. And we're going to want to be working with some data in here. We want to have that nice little image. So capstone teams, maybe I'll just put on their capstone teams, and then we want the students and all of those items. So stone teams. I'll want to have a table with a T head and a single row with 3 table H's. My extension doesn't seem to be working. Oh, some extensions were automatically updated. Oh. And updates will be applied the next time. Okay, I'll do it the long way. Table. Oh, what was it? It was TH3? Oh, yes, ×3. That's what it was. H ×3. Thank you, Zachary. Okay, let's see, what did I call those? I didn't actually give a name. That's interesting. So maybe actually I won't even do the T head. Maybe I'll just do a row for each one of those. And I'll come in and I'll figure out what that's going to be in a bit. I need to go and get some data. Let me line this up with here and get my CSHTML. I'm going to need to have my my capstone services from my back end. So capstone service. So a private read-only capstone service. And a constructor. Service equals service. On service. Okay. And on get, I'm going to want to have my my clients equal to the service list confirmed clients, and I'm going to want to have my students the service list team assignments. I don't have those properties, so I'm going to declare an auto-implemented property right there. And then I'm going to declare an auto-implemented property right there. And both of those things are going to be, you know what? Since they're both going to be, and I don't foresee having any other things there. I'm going to go and make, actually that first one, will that need to be a bind property? Not actually on that. I only need a bind property on the second one. So bind property for that team assignment students. Okay, make sure that that compiles. And give me a thumbs up if you have the assign teams model coded so far. By the way, I hope that everybody has been able to make some good progress on your West Wind demo stuff, because the next sample we're going to be diving into will be one that's on West Wind. What's the title for this issue? I think I called it, let's see, GH issue view 18. It was Capstone Student Assignments. That was the title I used for my issue. So the bind property is for the model binding that will happen on the post request. That's what that bind property is all about. So we're effectively saying these student team assignments, we're going to want to get that information back when they go and click the save button. I'll just throw a screen capture of what we've got so far on our assigned teams model. And let's go and start rendering this. Let's start listing all these things out. So we're going to have a for each var assignment in students. Actually, sorry, in model dot students. So that's my list of student team assignments. For each one of those, I'm going to have a row, and I'm going to have a cell with an input type equal hidden, and actually I'll come back to the input in a moment. Hidden input. Go. And then I'm going to want to also have the assignment full name of the student. In the next cell, I want to have a drop down. So I'll have a select. And there's a couple different ways I could go and set all the options for this. I'm going to do the one that has, actually first I'm going to have an option value equal quote, quote. And this will be for select a client. And then I'm going to have a for each var company in model dot clients. And I will put an option in there with a value equal to company client ID and the text of company. Let's see, is it Control Shift F? No. Alt Shift D. No. Control Shift D. I'm forgetting all my keyboard shortcuts. F1 document, or actually maybe Control Q. Format document. There we go. Control K, Control D. See, after switching with working in Visual Studio Code for a while, I'm getting my keyboard shortcuts all mixed up. Oh, and then we want to have a third cell. And this is going to be an input type equal text. And we'll just leave it like that. Let's see what this looks like. Let's see what this form looks like. So that would be admin. What did I call that? Assign teams. Assign teams. Okay, this isn't too bad. A little bit long, but it's a bulk assignment. I've got drop downs for all the companies. I probably should have done it sorted alphabetically, shouldn't I? So I'll have to go and do some of that. Okay, give me a thumbs up when you have the CSHTML coded. Okay, that's pretty good. So all of this is going to be happening as part of a form. Going to want to capture everything that's being done inside of here. So We're going to want to wrap all of this in a form element with a method equal post. And we're going to want to have a couple of buttons on this. The example showed the buttons at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and I'll put them there as well. So a button type is equal to submit. And I'm going to have this as being save. And then I'm going to have a button type equal reset. And I'll have this, I'll just call this reset. So by default, the save is going to go to the on post. But we have a question, and that is, how do we bind to a collection of items? We've got a whole bunch of these student team assignments. And we can't really use an ASP4 because we're doing each individual one inside of here. So how do we go and identify that given student? Well, we need to go and reference its student ID. And so that's where that little to do for the hidden input is going to wind up coming into play. So there's a couple of things that we actually need to create bindings for. And what you'll notice that as I do this, I'm not going to be using the tag helpers. Instead, I'm going to be using actual name value pairs. So I'll put in my input. The type is going to be hidden. And the first thing that I want to identify is my my name, which will be students.index. And the value is going to be the assignment student ID. Then I need to do another input, also that one that is hidden. And for this one, I want to identify students at a particular index dot student ID. And the index value will be at assignment student ID. And the value will also be equal to at assignment student ID. So effectively, what this goes and does for us is this creates a kind of a mapping of the information that we want to capture to go and pull that kind of information to our given student. So it'll be helpful for us to go and see what gets generated in the HTML. So give me a quick little thumbs up when you have the two input elements coded. And do Control-Shift-B, and then we'll look at that inside the browser. Okay, let's take a little look now. And let me refresh this page. And I want to specifically look at what's happening on a given cell. So here I'm going to look at this. And I want you to notice what is happening here. So we've got students.index is the name and a value of 1, and a students at 1 dot student ID is the value of 1. So that's kind of handy there. But you know what? Let me do a little bit of sorting just to sort of better give you the idea of what's going on, because I already mentioned sorting was something that I should look at fixing, both for the client info. So let me do an order by company.company name. And for the students, let me do an order by person.first name, comma person.last name. Let me build that, compile that. So quick little bit of sorting. And then let me go and do a page refresh, because I want you to see that what I've got for my hidden information, that one wasn't just because it was the first one in the list, right? That student's index, that's the student ID. That's the actual student ID. But there's going to be a whole bunch of students. So when this gets posted, it gets posted as name value pairs. That's important for us to see and to remember. That all gets posted as name value pairs. And we're going to take a little bit of a look at part of what's happening there. Now, what would happen if I did a, let me go and I'll select for a couple of them. And I'll scroll down. I'll take a little look at the network tab. Clear what's already there. And I'll do a save, and it'll come back with a broken page, but that's okay. Because I'm more interested in this part, right? Or in the actual sending of the data. And I'll float this out so I can see this. So the request headers. But here's what I want you to see for the form data. The form data that gets submitted is a whole bunch of name value pairs. And the way that model binding is set up for collections is it will use the index information it'll use this index value to start gathering together individual students who have that index for that particular piece of information. Now, all we have in there right now is the student ID, but let's throw in a little bit more information in our binding. And by the way, I am going to be giving you some stuff to read directly related to this after class. So let's go and put in some stuff here. Let's go and put a name is equal to students at, and we'll have the at assignment student ID dot, we're interested in the client ID. So, the value portion is the at assignment client ID. So this part is the dot client ID. So for whichever student that we're looking at, its client ID is going to be whichever one is the selected value. Now I believe, and actually I should take that off because the value is actually going to be on from the selected option. So I'm going to take off that value portion. But I will have it on this last input where the name is equal to students and at assignment student ID dot team letter is what I think I called it, and the value is equal to at assignment team letter. So make those last little bits of changes. Give me a thumbs up when you have the name value for the remaining form input controls. And I'm going to start making a little bit of notice here. So all of the values for these things are going to be associated together. So when it comes out and the assignment student ID is 6, that means the students at 6 dot student ID goes with the students at 6 client ID and the students at 6 team letter when we're going and binding it into that student team assignment entity type. That's what's happening with all of that. And for more information about that, I want you to read the following on model binding. You may have already read it from the list of readings that I gave you, but I'm going to throw that link in there because that's important. And when you get down to the section on there that it talks about binding complex collections, so especially the binding complex collections section, that's where it goes and gives an example of how to do all of this. So let me do a quick little build of my code and go to my browser. To the right page, 5. Okay, and let me get some data inside of here. A, B, and I do my save, but I want to track my DevTools stuff. Clear that for the moment. Save, come back to my DevTools and look at my assignment teams. I'll be able to see, lo and behold, here is a block of student information for student at index 6 and student at index 23, where basically 23 is that student ID to uniquely identify it. And then when I look at students at index 25, so you'll notice that I've got, for these other ones, I've got values for all 3 of them. But for here, I've got values for the students at index, but nothing for the client ID and the team letter because I left those blank. But it's going to basically bundle those and treat each of those as a single object. So during the model binding phase, these individual pieces will be grouped as the complex type. In this case, it's the student team assignment type. And then also overall, these will be placed in a collection. You can almost think of it as being like an array, because that's kind of how it's initially processing it, is as an array, where the elements in the array have their position at the students.index as it's gathering all these things up. So right now, it's just somewhat coincidental that the student index is the same as the student ID. Yeah, that is true. That is somewhat coincidental. Actually, it's not entirely a match, though, because you'll notice that the lowest student ID is 1. But remember how all our arrays are zero-based in their indexes? So they're kind of off by 1 anyway. But the idea here is that what if we had our student IDs seeded as, because remember they're identity columns in the database. What if the identity seed had been to start at 100? Then the first one would have been at 100, and then it would have gone up by whatever the increment was. So when we do binding of complex objects and we're wanting to capture what is the primary key and truly treat it like a primary key and not a plain old index position in the array, we want to be explicit about this. So it's important. It's important to be explicit in the index, in the dot index value, because the default behavior of ASP.NET model binding is to expect to start at, I think it's 0, although it may be at 1, I'm not sure. And B, have a consecutive and have no gaps in incrementing the index. That's the default behavior. And if you've got something that may have possible gaps and all that, taking this approach for binding our complex collections is important. Otherwise you may find that, the browser sent all of this data. So the browser, remember, it's sending these as name value pairs. The browser has no concept of the data type student team assignment or anything like that. Browser is just plain old HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the standard name value post submitting of key value pairs, name value pairs. So that's how it sends things. It's when it gets to the Razor pages that it winds up having this bit of plumbing that's underneath our Razor pages that does this model binding for everything that is a bind property. So because I've labeled my collection as a bind property, it's going to go and say, hey, that's a bind property. It's a collection. Let me look at all the name value pairs. The name of the collection was students. That was the name of the property on my model class. And so let's go and look for, as we're going through all of the students, let's go and examine these, look for students that have indexes. Okay, so that's a 6. That means all these things will go together. Any students at an index position of 6, That's the information we gather together to make our student team assignment. We instantiate that class. We put that into the array, and put that one into the array and that one into the array, and then you build that collection, which happens to be a list of student team assignments. So that's how it's doing it under the hood, just by our having that bind property. Public list student team assignment get set. So what happens if student 6 is gone? What happens if I do have gaps? That's okay. It'll be all right. So because we've been explicit, then that means that will handle the gaps for us. So no need to worry about gaps in the index values, because we are explicitly stating our index values, as opposed to letting ASP.NET just go with all these index items. So if we didn't have the students.index, it would start at 0 and expect there to be no gaps. And as soon as it hits a gap, it kind of loses track of that data. So we're already taking an approach. I've kind of jumped right ahead to the approach that is going to be the most reliable one you're going to want to work with when you've got a whole set of information. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just grab a screenshot. And we'll finish this off in next class to actually do the business processing in the back end. Thank you for sticking around. Went 5 minutes over, but hope you enjoyed the class. Bye for now.